evening, and welcome to Inside the Rookery, Season 8, Episode 3, where I am talking about gaming with humour with Mark Gibbons and Andy Law. And because it's an episode about humour, I have come as everyone's favourite clown. I cannot do the accent, don't even ask me to try.
Go on.
Nope.
At least one Mr. J.
Absolutely beyond me. Mr. J, it's absolutely beyond me. I don't know why. That particular accent I absolutely can't do. I'm trying, but no. So welcome to the stream, and welcome to everyone who's joined us from the Lawhammer Ask Me Anything Prestream with Andy Law. It is great to see you all here. Who came first this evening? It was Mark McGranahan tipping Seagoat to the post. So, shall we get into the questions straight away?
Yeah.
All right.
Why not? Let's go.
Why not? Hawk has got a pre-stream question. Rookery Publications, has any bits of the Coiled Crown influenced or made it into Lawhammer?
Yes. And by that I mean, I've already set up some parts to include parts that we've created for the Coil Crown into Lawhammer. After all, the Coil Crown is designed to be added to any roleplay game. It's designed to be added to D&D, Warhammer, Call of Cthulhu, if you desperately wish. Literally anything that you're playing out there could include that. So I have indeed laid out seeds, like so, sprinkle, 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 so that they can be added at a later point into the Lawhammer game. Because why wouldn't I? Create cool content, you want to use it, don't you?
Well, eventually you're going to run out of, Enemy Within.
Yeah. We're already through six books worth we're going through now. So we're heading into the 7th part, enjoying ourselves.
We are indeed. So let's jump into Sue Edgen's question, pre-submitted on our Discord server. Are there some types of humour that you think work better with horror? And I suppose we can talk about this both graphically, Mark, pictorial representations in the stuff that we write, Andy, and also in the way we play things around the table. So it's a very open question for us to answer.
Okay. Yes, I think there are. There's not always... Almost any type of humour can work because we, by our very nature, enjoy humour. So anything that can bring enjoyment to your table is generally a good thing. However, when you're looking to reinforce a tone, sometimes doing something that goes against that tone can undermine rather than reinforce. So you might, for example, be looking to create something that's super spooky, and certain types of humor can undermine that. But certain types of nervous humor can reinforce it, where people are nervously reacting and making nervous jokes between them, for example. There's lots of examples of humor in horror that you might not immediately think of, oh, that's been put in to be funny, but clearly was. Just take an obvious one. Go to Aliens. Game over, man! Game over! As he's freaking out. And it's actually funny. It is. It shouldn't be, but it kind of is. As you juxtapose their overconfidence that they had before with what they have now become, which is completely freaked out by everything that's before them. And you get to... Oh, do you want to say something there, Mark?
No, I was just drawing breath, waiting for you to...
I'll say one more thing and then drop over to Mark. And similarly, if we go to something that's not horror, although many find some aspects of it horrific, Pulp Fiction. There is nothing quite more amusing than the gruesome horror of accidentally shooting someone in the back of the car and not wanting to be on motherfucking brain duty because you were the one that was responsible for shooting the one in the back. It's gruesome, it's horrific, but in the context of the situation it's in, it's enormously funny. And I remember the first time I watched that in the cinema with an old friend of mine called Steph, who's just the best. He ended up opening up the Japanese stores for Games Workshop, which was an interesting thing. Who'd have thought? And we sat down, and when we watched that, the entire audience did something like this. Oh! oh, and they couldn't decide whether it was the funniest thing they'd seen or the most horrific thing you'd seen. So loosely, there are lots of types of humor that works very well with horror, but you often find it's ones that support and reinforce the type of horror you're looking for, rather than ones that are quite different too. Although even sometimes that, with a juxtaposition of something unexpected against something truly horrific, can really allow you to get a bit of contrast into the session.
Yeah, I think good examples of those brief sort of contrasting moments of humor that provide relief to the horror, because that's kind of what you need. If it's nothing but and mitigated horror throughout, that just sort of wears you down, and you kind of become either entirely resistant to it or just overwhelmed by it. So I think a film like The Thing has moments of humorous relief between the horror, and then in contrast to that, you have something like the Evil Dead series, which are humor and horror equally intensely throughout, and that's a different sort of vibe to that. The horror in the Evil Dead is it's sort of slapstick, which is unusual juxtaposition. I think you don't normally associate that level of daftness with or also just dreadful terror.
Yeah. And I think that is at the very heart of answering the question best, and that is actually the first question. What type of horror is it? And by understanding what type of horror you're attempting to convey, you can then figure out how humor can or can't be used within that context. Because if you're playing just a single session, you don't actually need any humor. It's not a necessary component, but clever use of humor during that can ensure that the horror often lands much more horrifically, in the same way that pretty much every Stephen King novel starts off in small town America and everything looks normal. And it's the juxtaposition of those normal lives, those normal families, with the pure horror of whatever it is that encounters them or they encounter, that allows you to realize how horrific it is. If it just dropped in at the horror at the beginning with, I don't know, rats gnawing through a body, first scene, classic in media res, yeah, you get yourself a classic, almost Warhammer novel style opening, because that's how they often deal with it. They go, in media res, action from the very beginning. But because you do that, it almost undermines the action. And because you need that pace change all the way through. And that's something that Stephen King does very well, for example.
When Turning Leaf asks in the comments, do you have any methods for setting expectations for humour at a table? I have had some experiences with misaligned expectations around it would be funny if it worked.
Loosely, yes. And the best way of doing that is talking before you begin. Every single time. There is nothing more depressing for someone who's attempting to run a game who has this brilliant idea in their head of how it's all going to run out, and they sit down with their players, they start playing, and because of one situation, everybody starts dropping, let's say, Monty Python quotes, because politics came up, and everyone says, that's no way to run, and away out comes watery bints with swords, and running your government in a particular way, and popular people's front of Judea, and everyone's laughing about it, and the poor old person who's playing the game's like, yeah, but what's that got to do with what I'm doing today? Oh God, damn it, I've done it completely wrong. Where that can be completely fixed with a single sentence at the start of play, we're going for this sort of game this evening, so can we do this? Whatever the type of game is and whatever this is, stated nice and clearly. Or even if you've got a problem player who literally can do nothing but jokes all the way through, just talk to them beforehand, either separately, but it's often better as a group so that everyone can go, yeah, I know what we're doing today, and say, look, this is really cool normally, but this one's meant to be a spooky one, so if we could keep the jokes down, or maybe only use them once or twice, or do this or that, whatever works best for your group. And you're going to know your group better than anyone else in the world, so you're going to have a better idea of who needs to be spoken to, or who doesn't, or the group does. That is often the best way of dealing with it, rather than just either A, trying to deal with it mid-session, where it often can feel like a grumpy reaction and it looks weird, and people are like, whoa, chill out, man, we're just playing and having fun, and it can become a point of contention. You don't want any contention at the table. You're there to have fun. It's meant to be fun. So that's bad. Or doing it afterwards every single time where you're constantly reacting rather than being proactive. And if you're constantly reacting, things are always going wrong behind you in your wake. And you're always, if you're running the game, feeling out of control and like things aren't working the way you want. And the players may be having the time of your life, but it's not just about the players having fun. It's about you having fun too. And sometimes that means you've got a story you would really like to tell, and that story might be spooky. And if they're sitting there joking their way through the whole thing, laughing away at silliness, putting a torch underneath their face and going, ah! All the time when it's meant to be the spooky moment, you will not enjoy it. So making sure that your own enjoyment is taken into account is important. But I will finish that with their enjoyment is equally important. And sometimes these points of relief where the players can have fun, relax, say comments that are perhaps funny or off character or whatever, are an important component of letting off steam and being with your friends. So ensuring that there is an outlet for that during the course of play is wise. Like, for example, if you want all your quips, let's do it in the quiet bit that's coming in the middle or something like that. And everyone can go, right, we'll do it then. And it helps channel the flow of the play.
So here's one I'll go to Mark for first. So Roderick asks, what's the difference in challenges when trying to get the right amount of humor in RPG art compared to in the text? Can I wind it back, Mark? I'll wind it back and say when you moved, say, from GW and you ended up then in like concept art and like at Blizzard, how much humor? What was the difference in humor level? Were you bringing in different humor in that concept art than you had been in your previous roles?
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly at something like World of Warcraft, there's a lot more. I mean, there's a lot more whimsy and playfulness. Actually, for me, the challenge there was always to inject some genuine darkness into it, because there wasn't a lot of that traditionally in WoW. There's occasional, there's big events that can be quite dramatic and quite dark, but generally there's a light playfulness to it. So I was always okay, how can I inject some genuine melodrama or some genuine, something that's genuinely feels a bit frightening in it. Then previously I'd worked on something like Diablo, where I had to almost kind of rein back some of that stuff, because there is very little lightness in that world. You know, it is unrelentingly grim. I mean, there are comic relief. There's characters that or creature types, for example, that are comic relief, and we think of in Warhammer, of course, you inevitably think of goblins. They are, squig hoppers or doom divers. There's that slapstick, violent, light relief fun that's always there to counterpoint the grim world of perilous adventure. So I think it's finding the sort of the balance, working out where you want that lightness and that humor, and if you do wish to contain it within a certain archetype, a certain creature type. I mean, even Tolkien's orcs and goblins are quite funny. You know, the language. I'm listening right now to Andy Serkis reading Lord of the Rings, the audiobooks and that, and he obviously he does great voices. And his all his orc stuff. I'm in the Two Towers at the moment, where Merry and Pippin are being carried taking hobbits to Isengard, and yeah, all the back and forth, all this sort of the voices. There's a likeness to it, which is I'd sort of forgotten, other than obviously the movies, but I'd forgotten that there was that element to it. That sort of almost like working class Jobsworth kind of arguments going on. There's sort of the petty bickering between rival middle management, you know, about what to do with these with the job lot of halflings they have to transport, and whether we can do it in whether we have to keep them alive and intact, or can we not just chop them up? Would not be easier to, do you know what I mean? All that kind of element.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people would think, especially people that had maybe not read the books or read them when they were much younger, would have said the books were quite po-faced, and it's the films, Peter Jackson's films, that brought that element of humor. But I'm like you, I went back and read them again, not not that recently now, and I was struck by how many of the parts that I thought were Peter Jackson came from the book.
Yeah. So
like pleasantly surprised.
Peter Jackson had added, like, oh no, that's actually in the book. Yeah,
especially some of the interplay between Legolas and Gimli. I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so again with the sometimes there's elements in the art that just naturally lend themselves to sort of humor, pieces of character design, costumes, but props, things can just, that can be enough to make something kind of amusing, to give it a bit of a whimsical, playful touch. You don't necessarily need to make characters true clowns in order to make them humorous. It can be a little juxtaposition of a weird object, a strange item that your characters encounter, that can give you a little bit of a light relief.
Yeah, hold that thought, because I do have another question for you, Mark, specifically about your art. But let's jump over to this one for the moment.
Oh, I had a point to ask on that one as well.
Oh, yeah, of course, because you're often balancing writers providing text and artists providing art.
Yeah, I was going to do a little answer on exactly that. One of the juggling acts when you're doing the art direction side is this, particularly depending on the setting that you're working on. Let's draw on Warhammer because it's the obvious one. Warhammer had quite a few exceedingly humorous moments, but it also had quite a few exceedingly bleak moments. So getting the right amount of balance between that's also important inside the choices of images that you go for throughout the course of your book. If you do nothing but humorous ones, while it's got a nice up and down roller coaster of tone, you've failed. If you do nothing but bleak, you've failed. If you do nothing but skulls and parchment, you failed. One of the joys of fantasy roleplay is that it does tend to go up and down that roller coaster. So where you might have at the beginning of an adventure what amounts to a custard pie fight with 3 halflings in a trench coat, which is always fun and indeed did happen in one of the books in the starter set. We started off with images that were as ridiculous as that, and supplemented that later with the true horror of a chaotic piece of nastiness. But it's not just the choice of which images that you put in. It's also a choice of which artists are responsible for doing those pieces, because some artists have got a natural flair for adding comedy to their work, or for looking at a piece which is clearly comical and present it in such a way that doesn't look comical. You look at it and you're like, holy crap, that's horrific. Also, it's kind of hilarious. And that's why choosing the right artist for a job is also enormously important. And I'm going to call out Mark in particular on this one. When we were putting together the second book for the Enemy Within campaign, there were a couple of images that I really, really wanted to see. And I was pinging around with Mark about some of these, because Mark has an extraordinarily good eye for both Warhammer and the comic. And that comic does not necessarily always need to be comical looking, but it is perhaps the juxtaposition of something extremely unlikely in a horrific surrounding. For example, a goblin warlord in a dress. And Mark was commissioned to do that piece. I was horrified that piece never actually came to fruition.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that.
Yeah, you did the sketch for that, and it came through and everything, and it was amazing. And I had in the background the image of the woman who the dress originally came from. It was cool. But the humor of that, a goblin in a dress, it's clearly ridiculous, wearing like a tiara. It's proper daft, but it's a goblin. And then that juxtaposition of the two, if anything, makes it more humorous, but also more horrific. So it plays on both the horror and the humor at once. We had a similar image lined up for the later half of exactly the same book, because the tone that I was aiming for those two primary pieces, because most of the rest of the artists couldn't do humor to save their lives in the same way. They didn't have that same deft eye. The other piece was, without being a spoiler, let's just say a large cockroach playing a harpsichord.
I remember that one.
and again, the horror juxtaposed beside the humor, because he's wearing a nice wig, of course, because, he's a very cultured cockroach. And that's just brilliant. And the way, exactly. And that's just brilliant, because it juxtaposes both beside each other, and in some respects also answers another overall question, which is, how can you use horror with humor? And that's often by juxtapositioning something that's unexpected expected into something horrific, something relatively mundane into an area where the mundanity just doesn't fit. And you're just left going, wait, what? Which can in turn also be hilarious.
Here's right. Roderick asks, "Are there any horror settings where you'd avoid humor?" I feel a little bit like a gothic horror, like a vampire, like that personal horror of the world of darkness. Sometimes humor doesn't go well with that at all. It doesn't go for the theme. It doesn't go for the tone you're creating. Maybe it's because I played it too much when I was a really serious teenage goth, but I do feel like that if you want to lean into the kind of world of darkness, exploring like deep questions, sometimes that doesn't really go along with kind of the more slapstick humor. You can still, there's still humorous moments, but I do think that I wouldn't like feel like that's a natural place for humor.
So my answer is no. There is no horror setting where I would avoid humor. There is many types of humor I'd avoid. As you say, slapstick and personal horror does seem a bit off. And will undermine potentially the core themes you're attempting to present. If you're going for this gothic ancient horror, the vampire who's been around for 2,000 years and is truly horrific and have him skid on a banana skin, that's going to kind of undermine just how creepy awful he is. It's going to be funny.
If it's banana skin, yeah, maybe. But if it's the spleen of his latest victim, then
that is where I agree. That is where you can have it undermine it, and in no way diminish his horror and awfulness, but can have the reality of life come in. And sometimes I often find the very situation that Lindsay describes, this almost edgelord version of teenage angst, often needs the biggest prick of a bubble, where you need a big piercing of that to explode it. For often the over serious nature that it has needs to be undermined somehow at points.
Yeah, that was often the case with a show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You know, in the first season, where the Master is rising, bringing about the end of the what was it, the harvest? Yeah. And he was again this officious team manager who was always being disappointed by his staff, failing to live up to his expectations, and all that sort of petty business stuff against the backdrop of the end of humanity, you know.
Yeah. And when we were playing Vampire Dark Ages, almost like every time it became a running joke, and it wasn't funny to the characters, but it was funny to the players. And that was there was three of us. We didn't have any all we could do was talk to people. We didn't have any at that time like social disciplines, and because it was the Dark Ages, you would be out at night and you'd come to a town and the gates would be shut. And every time that happened, we had to then have this conversation with the guard to try to convince them to open the gate. And we were so bad at it, like so bad. And I can imagine, like, even for those characters, for them, it was like such, you'd think they would get better at it. But every time one of them said something stupid, and like my character was quite young, and they'd be like, this child doesn't even look like you. Like, have you kidnapped this child? And every time, and it became like a standing joke, but it was a bit wearing. When someone eventually got presents or dominate, it was a good day. 101 Colonel says, I prefer to have the players now joke around even in serious moments, then blindside them with something horror inspired, have their guard down and not expecting it to happen.
Yeah.
You know, and he also says, or they also say, Andy Law in a dress and tiara for next stream.
Sure, why not? Have them.
That's just Thursday, isn't it, for you, Andy?
I try to keep it to Wednesdays only nowadays.
Okay, here we go. Hawk Oddly asks, how, both as a GM and a player, would you signify that a scene or moment is of importance and would prefer it to be taken seriously?
So, beforehand. And probably before the actual stream begins, if there's something that needs to be serious, you're much better just saying to everyone, yeah, we're doing serious today, keep the jokes down. It'll be as simple as that. If you're doing it for just a standard scene that you're doing in one of your roleplay games at home, then similarly, that can often pin it down nice and easily. Just say that first, and throughout the course of it, you'll be fine. However, as is often the case for most of us, where we might be running a game at a convention with our friends or whatever, and you've got an individual scene, and just that scene that you want to highlight, you could either bring that up beforehand, or simply, right at the very beginning, when I put the big shiny laurel leaf on my head, there we go, we're now in serious mode. Now, clearly that's stupid. And putting a laurel on your head like that does not make you look serious. But you could equally just drop like a little skull over your GM screen. Or you could have something similar, which basically told everyone that everyone's currently creeped out. Something is creepy around, and if you want to tell any jokes, these are the sort of jokes that should be to try and break the mood, and because you're nervous and scared, and all it does is land flat. And it just doesn't land well. So you can prime the players before you start the session that this is when it happens. So generally always before, and never with a, right, we're getting serious now, guys. Because if you speak it out loud like that, it sounds by its very nature like almost something that can be argued with. Yeah, well, I don't feel serious just now. Because some people are like that. Where if you've got the thing where they drop it down, everyone immediately says, oh, the time's come. Oh. And it's interesting how it changes the tone of the conversation. Conversations are a two or multiple party part. So if you say something, others will respond, not necessarily the way you want. So using something non-verbal is more likely to get the response you want out of others. But definitely prime at the beginning of the session. That generally works.
Yeah, and I think you said something interesting there at the start. You said before the stream starts, because at the moment you're thinking more in terms of we are playing a game where we have an audience, and when you have an audience, you have to have more consideration about how things land with an audience than you necessarily do. Like, it doesn't really matter in your own house without a stream. If something falls flat, you can even like do that bit again. Like, we don't have that luxury on when you're streaming an actual play game necessarily.
Well, with the streaming, there's not there's a kind of an implied code of conduct for your players. You know what I mean? Because I can remember back in the day when I would GM games, occasionally the whole session would derail and it would all turn jokey, and at that point you might as well just give up the narrative. But I suppose if you have people tuning in to watch you, everybody has to be, if not on their best behavior, but at least on some sort of
sort of behavior, Mark. On some sort of behavior. I mean, John has asked, what's the biggest swing you've ever had in a game between horrific and humorous? I mean, literally last night, no spoilers, but a body count in the thousands, and by the end of the stream, my character was describing the difference between a gangbang, a tag shag, and a ruck fuck to the rest of the characters. in absolute seriousness.
When we play those three again, I'm familiar with the gangbang.
A gangbang, a tag shag, and a ruck fuck.
I can guess what the ruck fuck is. Yes, it's actually beautifully descriptive. What was the middle one?
I mean, you're gonna have to watch the stream.
Yes, I guess so.
There's humor in your bloody games. Oh, bloody hell.
Yeah, so that was last night. Seagoat says it only takes one random quip or some random comment for the rest of the table to begin laughing. And yeah, so Wolf Spain, I want to come back to this one because we haven't talked about music. I use music to change the atmosphere. That could be a good signifier for a GM, like, I'm playing the serious music, you know?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
sure.
that does work.
That's like, okay. Right.
Yeah, we did that frequently back with Vampire, but often by mistake, because I was far too lazy to bother changing the music all the time because I was too busy being, character X, Y, or Z. So whenever the music, which was on a loop, would change to the serious bit, holy shit, things turned out bad every time. Not that they were necessarily aware of that, but that's when the tone went downhill. For them, at least. Always fun.
So, and just to go back to this question from John, what's the biggest fun you've ever had in a game between horrific and humorous? I've mentioned something about a game, but I just want to talk about Deadpool, because I had only seen, I think Deadpool does do this really well. And I had only seen the trailer for Deadpool and some of the and heard about Deadpool, the very first film, and I had said to Andy, I don't want to watch it. It looks childish and pathetic. Like, the humor is just stupid. Like, I don't understand why it needs to be so graphic violently. And Andy was like, look, just come and see what you think. And I loved it. And I said to him, like, it's the most amazing rom-com I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And you don't get that from just the way they portray it in the trailer. The trailer makes it look like a pathetic little boy's fantasy. The actual film from end to end is a love story.
Yeah.
And the humor and the punctuation of the humor and then the truly horrific stuff that happens is kind of like part of the commentary that Deadpool has on society. And I didn't realize that, but I think Deadpool does do that really well, especially because he breaks the fourth wall and so can knowingly comment on what he's doing in a way that I thought The Boys did well in the first season, but then I just felt it got like too much. Maybe that's unfair.
Yeah, I love the first season of The Boys, and I sort of, my interest in it has waned because I know people tell me it's nowhere near as shocking or as graphic as the comics, so I can only imagine. But yeah, it seemed to be constantly chasing that big shock moment. But again, I think it's a really interesting commentary on the superhero archetype as we have traditionally absorbed it.
When turning that scene has had me excited for Monday since it happened. I need to be able to rewind and laugh at reactions. Yeah, I think that scene is the reason that works as humor is because the character who says it, like Lindsay, is trying not to laugh, but the character doesn't think it's funny at all. She's just genuinely deadpan, trying to explain like the mechanics of human sexual interaction to some humans. And so I think that's like a good thing to keep in mind as a GM, that sometimes the things you're saying that are funniest require you to have the straightest face of all. Chapter Grimm says, I should say that Mad Max Furiosa reference. I haven't seen Mad Max Furiosa, so I don't know. It's definitely an example of dark humor. But someone talking about it earlier says, kind of has me thinking of the Teddy in Furiosa. So maybe that means something. Have either of you two? You haven't seen it either.
Yeah, either. Yeah, sadly.
Well.
It's coming to streaming next week. I'm very excited.
So here's a question from Mark. Lazy Cat asks, Mark, I know you for your more serious images. Do you prefer to do humorous or serious?
It's nice to be able to inject a little bit of humor into something to kind of put it, because you particularly if you get to imply a narrative with that, if there's an element in a piece of art that is light or playful, it's always nice to do that. I like the spiky darkness for sure.
What did you start with, like when you were a kid? What were you like? Often when you're a kid, you start, I guess, well, Andy did, and I used to copy your stuff, so I know that's how I started. Not that I'm an artist, but when I had aspirations, it was your work that I would be like copying. And I know that, Andy, you would look at like work that your mum and dad have and try. So where were you drawn to begin with? Or have you always been a creative genius and not needed other people?
No. No, I don't know. I don't know that I was drawing much of anything. I think when I discovered gaming, then it suddenly gave me purpose and focus. And then I'd be like, all right, I'm going to draw characters in my party, or I'm going to draw some monsters. You know,
Cool,
prior
yeah.
to that, I don't. I think I do what every little kid draws. I don't think that. I remember drawing sort of World War II stickmen battles with my little Stuka dive bombers and tanks and stuff
Really?
like that. I remember doing all that, but nothing. Oh no, I did some funny stuff. I did as a kid. I did some. I did some humorous stuff, I think.
I copied a lot of
I have to
Thrud.
go back and try and cast my mind through it. I think, I do the stuff that I was into at the time. I was, whatever TV shows or books. I remember doing some Hobbit artwork. When I was reading the book in school, I remember drawing dwarves stuck up trees with the wolves at the bottom, which I guess is humor and drama.
Yeah. When Turning Leaf says, on that note, do you guys have a preference between in-character and out-of-character humor at the table? It depends on tone of the game, of course.
Yes, I have a preference for in-character humor, and in general, because that adds to the story. And that adds to the overall experience that's being portrayed at the table. However, we sometimes, when we encounter a situation where there is an obvious joke and it makes absolutely no sense for anyone to say at the table, can't help ourselves, we say it nonetheless. And I don't like stopping that, because that also brings fun to the table and it makes everyone laugh. It often provides a pressure relief if it's been, for example, a very grim period that you had beforehand, where you've had that grim section, you've gone through it, and then people are laughing and they're enjoying themselves at the table. I see no reason why I would ever interrupt that. I don't like it being consistent and that all the jokes are out of time, because it takes people out of the game. So generally, I don't restrict it, while simultaneously have a loose frown for when it becomes too much. And if it does become too much, I'll often say we need to tone this back for reason X, Y, or Z, to ensure that we get through the game, because you'll often find the out of character stuff interrupts the play. Particularly if it's something that naturally moves on to an extra joke, which means that you might be around the table discussing, I don't know, Room X with Trap Y. And somebody goes, haha, that is like movie Z that I watched. And everyone starts talking about movie Z, which means that the play has been interrupted. And whilst the initial joke, totally cool with, but the interruption to play, less cool with, because there's a bunch of story we want to get through so that we can get to the big bad guy or the set piece story or whatever it might be that you're doing. So broadly speaking, you're there to have fun, and anything that has fun is generally a good thing. And fun doesn't just mean funny. Fun sometimes means serious, dramatic, incredibly sad. Fun can come from all sorts of crazy places. Entertainment is, after all, a multifaceted thing. However, when you're dealing with roleplay in particular, not board games, but roleplay, certain types of humour, and it differs for every table, can sometimes come to dominate over the game you're playing. And if that's the case, then you, as whoever's running the game, probably should sit down with everyone and say, let's not do this so that we can focus on the game, or not worry about it, because that's the type of group you have and that's how they're getting their fun. And that's okay too. And that's not a bad thing. My preference is not to have it, but your preference might be, no, holy shit, I love that shit. That makes the evening fun. We're all drinking our beer, eating our pretzels, having the time of our lives. That's exactly what you should be doing. And I applaud it.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, what do you think? And as in the question, when Turning Leaf's question, it's the tone of the game. And it's just, when you said that, it started me thinking about, I mean, there's a Discworld RPG that's coming from our publishing partner, Odysseus. And I wonder, certainly if you have a party that sort of embrace the levity and the humor in character and out of character, then possibly a world setting like that might suit them better than Call of Cthulhu, you know?
Yeah. I in fact, to completely reinforce that, I'm still wearing that gold thing. To completely reinforce that, I had a group back when I was a teenager, and they were playing, what was the game? It was Tunnels and Trolls, of all games, which is not a good game, by the way. It's fine for what it was at the time, but not necessarily the best game. I enjoyed it, though. But they clearly wanted to have a laugh. And that was what they were trying to do. And after about, must be about 5 or 6 sessions of that, we switched system over to Paranoia. Now, if you don't know Paranoia, cut a long story short, it's a darkly humorous game of a potential history that is a massive satire upon current society. There's been a couple of versions of it. One was based off of the 80s Society. That was the original edition that we were playing. And another one came later, which was based much more off of early noughties Society. And generally speaking, satirizing everything that everyone thinks is important about that society and showing it to be much less important than most people realize. It's one giant joke, right down to the fact that you're playing not one cart, you're playing a clone of 6 other clones. So when you die, another one just gets shipped in and dropped down, because you're going to die quite a lot just because of the way the jokes play out in Paranoia. So that worked really, really well. And they had the time of their lives. I had the time of my life. Everyone was happy. But simultaneously, I was also running 2 other games, which were as po-faced as fuck. They were awful, but that in many respects was good for me because it provided me with a juxtaposition between the two. And whilst I attempted to inject humour in those, I found it very hard because I was young and I wasn't sure how to do it. And it took quite a bit of practice before I landed in a place where I could take a very grim story about what was undead in this particular story, and there was a lot of horrific death, and add humour to that in a way that didn't undermine the overall tone but instead supported that. To begin with, I just couldn't do it. So everything was unremittingly grim, which was possibly a mistake. But hey, you live and learn, don't you?
Roderick asks, could you please give us your elevator pitch on why it matters, gaming with humour, so I can point to the unconvinced to your clip? Who wants to go first?
Go on, then.
Oh, me, yeah. No, I shall not. You can't make me. Oh, look, I'm going to bring this up. Ha!
Oh,
Funny pictures. Mark, you can talk about these funny pictures now.
Well, I mean, goblins, they have always traditionally been the light relief in fantasy, even though I don't know if you go back to the origins of go back to sort of Scandinavian myth and stuff, whether they were always particularly funny, but it's certainly the way we interpreted them, and certainly Games Workshop championed the ludicrous, the snotling punk wagon there and the squig hoppers. Yeah.
Of those squig hoppers, I just have to say, the one in the background to this day still makes me laugh. I remember not seeing it for what must have been about 2 years. And flipping by that book again, because I ran a club with about 100 and odd people turning up every week, playing Warhammer, fantasy roleplay, various other games. And Orc and Goblin Army List, that came out pretty much just before I moved down south. And we were looking through it, never saw it. And then I saw that thing and I literally guffawed. It just has so much movement.
The thing is, though, about goblins is that, just take a moment to look at that image on the right and imagine your character, standing there with that thing coming at you. It's hilarious on the page, but in reality, they are absolutely terrifying, and that's what makes goblins even more funny.
Oh yeah, if you're a Bretonian peasant yeoman and you stood on the front rank with your shield and spear, and you can see in the distance there's something looks like it's bouncing across the field towards you, and then you hear the noises of goblins and squids, and it's not funny very long.
Yeah, it's not funny anymore.
Actually, speaking on the horror of those, my youngest daughter just 2 days ago saw her first image of a squig. And the image itself was, quite. I was a little bit stunned too. I was like, what do you mean you've never seen a squig? Who are you? You are not my daughter. I didn't say it quite so vociferously. Kind of did. But she saw it. And her first gut instinctual reaction to it was the opposite of mine, where I looked at the image and I was like, it's a squig. She looked at it and went, it's awful! Look at imagine? Ah! And all she could do was see it for the mighty maw of teeth dripping hungry saliva, and she was horrified by it. And also loved it because it was horrifying. But interesting to see the different reactions that different people can get from the same image. Where for me, I look at the squighopper and I can't help but smile, but then I look at the image of the squighopper and look at what it actually is and go, holy shit. Just imagine that fucker coming at you.
The third one at the bottom.
Total Warhammer done it like an animation of is there a? I'll have to go look for that.
Someone in the chat can tell us that,
because it'd be interesting to see how. Yeah, because it's one thing to draw a still image, but you think, oh, how exactly are these things going to move across the battlefield?
I think the third one at the bottom is what makes it funniest, because those two, the big one and the little one, are coming straight at you, and that third one is just like away.
You've seen something.
You've just seen something.
And the goblin's just hanging on.
Yeah, just like the goblin with
boing, boing, boing.
Oh, I guess I'm going this way now. This is exciting.
Yes, they're in Total War.
What's next?
Plague Sensor Bearer.
Yeah, again, I mean, fundamentally horrific. It's a rat man swinging a censer full of plague smoke. Yeah, but also it's funny because it's a rat in a dress with a ball on a stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andy's Skaven in Lawhammer are unfailingly hilarious. But also
horrible. I mean, the first time I heard you do the voices, it was just, Jesus Christ, this is terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. Hilarious, but also absolutely awful in every way. Oh, it's Mark.
Hey!
This is great. It's like exciting. I don't know what's coming up next.
Well, it's obviously I did portraits for all of us for Rookery, and then it's finding picking an element of our character. Well, the reality of who we are, but also interpreting it and caricaturizing it for an RPG world.
Is that rum? Yes. No.
Is it, no, it's Giddy Aunt Beer.
It's Giddy Aunt Beer, as I recall, isn't it? Yeah, Giddy Aunt.
Yeah, we should partner up with a brewery somewhere, a little Scottish brewery, and would you mind
make some Giddy Aunt, totally.
Stout, you know.
Oh, here's the other one.
There we are.
Andy Leask looks very serious.
Well, yeah, well, it's serious, and then he's got a ridiculous nib hat on. His crown of office.
His nib mitre.
Yeah, so that sort of feeds into the finding the sort of humorous element within a potentially serious character, whereas Andy's is all joke.
Is all joke.
I was actually about to say is all accurate. I don't think there's any joke there at all. I'm actually a little surprised that you would say all joke, perhaps a little offended.
Well, I mean, in the sense that it's all meant to be laughed at. There's very little there that you go like, oh, that's
wait, it's just a perfect portrait. You're just saying that I need to be laughed at? Move on swiftly.
Oh, I like
nice.
the one on the left. So cute.
So that I can't quite remember how that stuff came about. It's a little set of pieces I did for Cool Mini or not.
Was that Massive Darkness?
Yes. Although
Massive
that was
Darkness.
not what it was originally for. It was originally for Zombicide, and then they shuffled it into because it was like, oh, we need a Necromancer, and I like the idea of a preteen Necromancer girl, kind of that sort of young emo, purple haired emo goth thing. But what if she actually could control the undead? And rebelled against her former master, the necromancer that she. So it's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Necromancer's Apprentice. So she's got the severed head of her former master on the stick.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah,
with the pins through its head.
Yeah, and then she's just enjoying. It's Daisy of the Dead, she's called, and she's just enjoying the
Daisy of the Dead.
And she's got I like that little touch. She's got that classic stripy witch type that every goth kid has. Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. It's like looking at me when I was 15.
That's
And
the
on the
girl I
right-
fell in love with.
That's the girl he fell in love with. On the right, that's from Blood Bowl.
Yes.
By the look of it. Yeah.
Yes, the Death Roller.
Death Roller.
Death Roller. Yeah, I mean, and because Blood Bowl takes the implied humor of some of the Warhammer races and just cranks it right up for a game of football.
It does.
You know?
Yeah, and I think dwarves and Blood Bowl are inherently funny because I don't think there's a dwarf team in Blood Bowl that has ever won anything ever. They're such a bad team. Or maybe that's just Andy Leask's dwarves.
I think that's entirely unfair given dwarves are renowned for being this horrible team to play. Because, you know, they just sit there. Dodge! I got tackled, down you go.
Some dark deeds.
Something a little more contemporary. It's injecting some humor. Again, just implied humor, I think, with some of the characters, situations, things that clearly happened to them. The poor patient on the right who's been experimented on, the witch sniffer with the giant nose. It's character traits that provide opportunity for a little bit of humorous RPG.
Oh, and the guards. The guards just are. I think it could be quite a dark game if the guards weren't as hilarious as they are.
I mean, there's nothing funnier than that blood dripping off there.
Sure.
No, but there is. Nothing. It amuses me completely.
It's sort of the authorities that you're inevitably coming up against, the opportunity to make them a little fun and playful. I think it's just the nature of the game. With something like Dark Deeds, any chance you get to inject some of that levity in there, because again, without it's a lot of villainous behavior. So to counterbalance that with either characters that deserve it or just a little reminder that you will possibly be twatting a guard over the head with a skull on a stick, a bejeweled skull on a stick.
A bejeweled skull. When Turning Leaf says, "Oh, his ears," is that the one on the right-hand side when Turning Leaf, where the ears are like
squashed down by the hat?
That doesn't fit. Well, that's the end of our little tour d'art. So we'll go back to a question. There's one from John here that's quite long. So I find it easy to insert impromptu humor into my sessions, frequently subconsciously, and often reduce my players to choking on their laughter. However, when I try to premeditatively write the humor directly into a scene, it often ends up falling flat, feeling forced, and causes the scene to come to a shuddering halt. How do you go about planning humor so it can be easily adjusted to the mood of a session?
This is actually surprisingly easy. And the goal here is to not try and plan for humor, but to plan for the opportunities for humor. So instead of writing something that is meant to make everybody laugh, you write something that is inherently humorous, and you allow it to play out at the table in exactly the same way that the parts that you are yourself improvising would play out at the table. There's no need to write a joke per se. You can instead have a goblin in a dress and just present it neatly. The jokes make themselves. The humor comes from the situation. So you're not so much saying, this is a goblin in a dress and it's funny because, and this is the particular pun I'm going to use to reinforce this, or anything similar. You're writing to a humorous situation rather than necessarily writing a joke that's supposed to perhaps directly flow from the situation that you're in. And I have found that is very, very easy to write for a role-playing game, because there is something inherently amusing about a whole host of different things. And all you need to do is present it, and the players will respond, and you in turn will almost certainly respond too. We have, for example, in one of our many little things beavering away in the background, let's just call this particular dwarf a bung seller. And the bungs that this dwarf are selling are They just as you saw from Mark, you can't help but be amused. Even the name, Bung Seller.
I think we settled on Bungmonger, didn't we?
Oh yeah, Bungmonger. Or Bungmonger. And it's funny because of the nature of what it is, but you're not presenting it as a joke. You're presenting it as something that's serious within the game world. And while they themselves may be utilizing humor to sell their bungs, for example, with a smile on their face, it then becomes a memorable, funny situation because it's just a part of the world, the jokes are coming from the world rather than you making a joke.
And if you don't avail yourself of the Bungmonger's facilities, there's something very, very unfunny going to be happening to you.
Debung yourself.
I think also like letting the dice lead you down path. So if you had that goblin in the dress and they're standing at the top of the stairs and they fumble or they fail, like the obvious thing to do is make that goblin like it's not used to wearing a dress, it trips up, it falls down the stairs, it tumbles over 3 or 4 times, and it lands at the bottom with its legs apart and the skirt like over its head. That's just funny.
Yeah, I have found I agree with John entirely. The most naturally amusing moments that come at the table are the ones that naturally unfold from the situations that you present. If you try to write a joke, it'll feel like you're attempting to make something land. But if you create instead a humorous situation where the jokes themselves will naturally flow from it, you're much more likely to succeed. And it's also actually easier to write because trying to write a joke also feels a bit forced, and you end up falling into what in many games I've played in the past, like Paranoia, where people are desperately trying to be funny rather than just letting the situations that they're in be funny. And learning to play in that environment is a part of the process. Playing a Terry Pratchett game is very different to playing your standard fantasy game. When you're playing a Terry Pratchett game, you're allowed to make those jokes, you're allowed to make those things happen. The crazy over-the-top silliness is good, but they flow from the situations that you're in. And the more the writer of the adventure you're playing has tried to make jokes, often the less successful they'll be while the players are making their own jokes and having the time of their lives. So yeah, it's about facilitating players and facilitating you rather than necessarily constraining you and trying to make a certain thing happen.
Shall we go back to Roderick's? Could you please give us your elevator pitch for White Max? I think so, yeah. So for me, humor in gaming is important because humans like to laugh. There you go. That's my elevator.
Okay, my elevator one is you're playing games to have fun, and humor is an important component of that. Humor is also an important juxtaposition to other parts of human experience, and the difference between those will allow you to appreciate each of the others more. So if you've got darkness, humor looks more humorous. If you've got humor, the darkness looks darker when they're put side by side.
Yeah, I was sadly at a funeral yesterday of a friend of mine, and just thinking about it and the speeches that one of my other friends did and family did. There was lots of humor in there. Like, we were laughing about the facts of her life, the things that made us happy to be around her, and the funny things. And there was much more humor in those speeches than you might expect. But as humans, that's what we want to do. We naturally want to come together and laugh. Even when we cry, we want to laugh.
Yeah, there's a poster on my wall there from Legend, and it says, "What is light without darkness?"
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Exactly.
There you go, Roderick.
What is light
without darkness?
Good job, Mark. So that really brings us to the end of our stream. We're 2 minutes away. Is there anything we need to say or ask people to do? Maybe go and look at
buy our game now because it's out, isn't it?
So apparently the game is shipping from America. That being the case, if you're currently in America or ordering from America, go buy our bloody game. Dark Deeds is available right now. It's humorous. It's dark. It's funny. It's stabby. It's all kinds of fun, which is the important thing that we are really aiming at, because we all like to get together and have a good laugh around a table. You've already seen some of the art in this very stream. Look at those ears. They were funny. They were amazing. All the stars on their chests. How could you not enjoy that? Go buy the game from your Modifius website right about now. Thank you very much, Hawk Audley. Pre-order Dark Deeds there. You've got links. Go click them.
Excellent.
It should be shipping in the UK and the rest of the world
in about a week. Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're not in direct control of that, or we're at the mercy of distributors and shipping and all that kind of madness. But we will make a big splash. We will make a noise once we know it's in the high street.
And then once we've made that noise, we will publicly make another noise, which you should all pay attention to.
Oh.
Anyway, that's not worth saying. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Mark. Thanks to Andy. Thanks to our patrons, as always, for helping us do these streams. Thank you to our friendly Discord community. Please do go and join us there. Until next week, I shall say good night and caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.
Oh.